Why do you suppose it is that I spend so much time talking about science and the cosmos and the creation and the spirit and the body and the incarnation and the physicality of the new covenant? Well, because I am persuaded that there's no intelligible way to talk about spiritual things apart from physical things. Over the course of the last 2 weeks, I've gone to great lengths to demonstrate to you how it is that the spirit realm has a physicality all its own, which physicality corresponds with the carnal realm in a cogent way. And this correspondence isn't merely typological, it's topological as well. It corresponds in time, in space, and in substance. Both realms are made up largely of matter and energy. Now, the matter of heaven is different from the matter of earth. In 1 Corinthians 15:44, Paul tells us that just as surely as there is a natural body, there's also a spiritual body. And the Bible actually tells us quite a bit about how spiritual bodies and natural bodies differ and how they're similar. The glorified body of Christ is similar to our bodies in that He can eat and drink and touch and be touched. But it's different from our current bodies in that He can appear behind locked doors and He can walk through solid rock. According to Matthew 28:2, the stone wasn't rolled away from the tomb until Mary and the other women arrived there. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for the angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat upon it. Jesus didn't roll the stone away and then put it back in place. He went through the rock. So clearly, His resurrection body, while similar to our current bodies in many ways, also has considerable differences. There's both continuity and discontinuity between heaven and earth. And one of the continuities between the two was at the center of last week's lesson. In John 4:24, Jesus tells the woman at the well that God is spirit. And according to Jesus, this is why those who worship Him aright must worship Him in spirit and in truth. Now, in our tradition, this has been taken to mean that acceptable worship must be offered only in the context of the truth. The truth meaning sound doctrine. But placing that emphasis on this text wrests it from its context and robs the words of Christ of their actual meaning. Because what's in view in this passage isn't false doctrine. Jesus doesn't indict the Samaritans for worshiping God under the aegis of false doctrine. He indicts them for being ignorant of what is actually taking place when they worship. Remember, the Greek word aletheia doesn't just refer to truth as opposed to falsehood, but also, and more importantly for today's lesson, to reality as opposed to reverie. As you may recall, I've defined truth for you in other lessons. The long definition is that truth is that which corresponds to reality as reality is perceived by God. But the short definition is that truth is reality. Not only that, but the Greek construction of this verse does not present spirit and truth as separate things, but as complementary things, as things that go hand in hand. Accordingly, when Jesus tells the woman at the well that we must worship God in spirit and in truth, He's not telling her that we need to dot our I's and cross our T's. What He's telling the woman at the well is that those who worship God must do so in reality, which reality is spiritual. Now, stop and think about that for just a minute. Because the long and short of this statement by Christ is that the word spiritual cannot mean ideational, emotional, sensational, intellectual, meaningful, or psychological, and it certainly cannot refer to a heightened state of awareness. God is spirit. That is his reality. And those who would worship him aright must meet him on that plane in a way that corresponds with that reality. Now that presents us with a certain kind of challenge, because even though Jesus does not say to the woman at the well that God is purely spirit, that would seem to be the case. If I understand the matter correctly, God the Son did not have a body prior to the incarnation. He does now, but he didn't then. But God the Father has never had a body, at least not a body like our bodies. When the Bible speaks of God's right hand or his mighty arm or his face or his back, I'm of the opinion that those references are anthropomorphic, figurative, poetic. But that doesn't mean that God has no substance. God is spirit, and spirit isn't nothing. It's something. But what? What is spirit? Well, this is not a question about which the Bible is silent. No, according to the Bible, spirit is energy. When God told Moses that his name is Yahweh, when God told Moses that his name is I am that I am, he wasn't just telling him I am that which I am. He was also, and just as importantly, telling him I am so that I am. I am that I may be. Some time ago in the Life of Christ series, I demonstrated to you that both the immortality that humankind had in the garden and the immortality that we will have in the age to come is not that of beings who have the power of being within ourselves, but that of indefinitely sustainable creatures. Which is to say, we are and will always be creatures whose lives depend on energy provided to us by God. God, on the other hand, has the power of being within himself, and so is dependent on nothing outside of himself to sustain his life. Rather, he sustains his own life. However, and this is extremely important for grasping the central message of today's lesson, God's life, it appears, must be sustained, and that also requires energy. Now, God is immortal. But what is immortality as it is experienced by God? Well, it's analogous to the immortality experienced by us, the difference being that he has the ability to produce the energy required to sustain his own life, and we don't. And that is his reason for being. Dr. Jordan Peterson, who has studied the question of meaning in a more scientific and objective way than just about anyone ever, defines meaning as something like the embodiment of purpose. According to Peterson, meaning is possible only in the context of value, and value is an inherent quality of life. All living things have certain values, which values govern their behavior and give their lives meaning, even if that value is as basic as that of a single-celled organism whose fundamental reason for being is to survive long enough to mitosize into 2 daughter cells. Well, God the Father has a number of values which are articulated in the Scriptures. However, his most fundamental value is articulated in Exodus 3:14, where God reveals his name, telling Moses, I am that I may be. God the Father has a reason for being, to be that he may be. God the Father has the power of being within himself, but quite apparently that power is not autonomic. Quite apparently God the Father has to do something to sustain his life. That's the value that makes his life meaningful. The existence of God isn't just a raw fact to be accepted, it's a meaningful reality. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us, at least not in so many words, that it takes energy to sustain the life of God the Father, but it does tell us that God the Father is engaged in an ongoing pursuit for energy, which energy is glory. Glory is a discrete form of spiritual energy, which is pure, powerful, luminous, and quickening, which is to say that it's life-giving. It is, in fact, the life substance of God the Father. And according to Romans 6:4, it is the power by which He raised God the Son from the dead. It is His essence. It is the stuff of which He is constituted. And it has mass, or something very much like mass, in a way that's very much like energy in this realm, which also has mass, or something very much like mass. According to physicist Victor T. Toth, electricity has weight. In his research, he's observed that superconductors weigh slightly more when charged than they do when they have no charge. The same holds true for batteries. Fully charged batteries weigh more than batteries that are dead. Now, as it turns out, that isn't why dead batteries bounce, while live batteries don't. The reason for that is because of a molecular change in the density and elasticity of the gel inside a battery that takes place as the charge is depleted. Nevertheless, charged batteries do weigh more than dead batteries, and this is presumably because electricity has weight. More compelling, however, is the recent discovery that photons have size. And the size is much bigger than I ever thought it would be. Because even though the diameter of a photon is infinitesimally small and has not yet been measured, recent studies have demonstrated that photons are actually quite long, measuring about 4 meters in length. So while the volume of a photon is not yet known, it's clear that they occupy space. And if I understand the matter correctly, anything that occupies space has mass. Accordingly, it would seem that light has mass. That would seem to be the state of things in this physical realm. And according to the Bible, the same is so when it comes to glory. Exodus 40, 34 through 35. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. 1 Kings 8, 10 through 11. And when the priests came out of the holy place, a cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. 2 Chronicles 7, 1 through 2. As soon as Solomon finished his prayer, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. And the priests could not enter the house of the Lord because the glory of the Lord filled the Lord's house. Ezekiel 10:4. Then the glory of the Lord rose above the guardians and moved to the doorway of the temple. The cloud swelled and filled the temple, and the court was filled with the blazing presence of the glory of the Lord. According to the Bible, glory has mass. Glory has substance. And glory is the life substance of God the Father, who is Spirit. And if that's correct, then it would seem to follow that spirits have mass, or something very much like mass. Spirits are not bodies in the sense that we are bodies, but they are also not immaterial. They have a physicality all their own, just as electricity has a physicality all its own, and light has a physicality all its own. But if that's the case, then what is the utility of the cosmos? Why are we necessary? This week I watched a presentation by Stephen Ray, who is considered somewhat of an expert on Islam, and the presentation was entitled, What Every Infidel Should Know About Islam. But after listening for about an hour, I decided I need to find another expert on which to rely. Because he presents himself not just as an expert on Islam, but as an expert on Christianity. And according to Ray, the reason God created us is because in the Trinity, in the Godhead, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit were having so much fun fellowshipping together that they decided they needed to share the joy with others. So they made us in order to increase the joy of fellowship. Now, to be fair, he said this to emphasize the community of the Trinity over against the solitary nature of Allah as he is presented in the Quran. Nevertheless, what he said is one of the stupidest things I've ever heard a theologian say. And you know the reason why. Because you know that God created the cosmos and us for his glory. Now, we know that this scheme on his part is working out. His invention is doing what it was created to do. I mean, he created the cosmos, and from the cosmos he is anticipating a harvest of glory. A harvest that he refers to in his word as a profitable harvest. A good return on his investment. And we know roughly how it works. We know how it is that God gets more out of the cosmos than he's put into it, according to the laws of thermodynamics, and I know that God is not constrained by these laws, but he did write them. He did invent them. And as far as we can tell, these laws are universal, applying the same way in every sector of the universe and working the same way for as far back as in time as we can see, for billions of years. So let's go with this constant, which seems to have been woven into the warp and woof of the fabric of the cosmos from the very beginning. According to the laws of thermodynamics, the universe, the whole universe, everything that is a closed system. And a closed system cannot produce perpetual motion. But the visible universe is a horse of another color. You see, it didn't take long for the cosmos to produce light. According to the latest research, the time difference between the Big Bang and the advent of visible light was about 42 minutes. But whatever the time between the beginning of the expansion of the universe and the advent of visible light, it wasn't nothing. It was something. And in that time, the universe got a head start on light. According to Genesis 1 through 3, God first created the heavens and the earth. Then God said, "Let there be light." And from that time to the present, however long you think that is, 15 billion years according to most scientists, the visible universe has been chasing the whole universe. And so far, these many eons into this venture, the light has not yet overtaken the darkness. And meanwhile, what's happening in that chase? Is it slowing down? Is it running down? Is entropy overtaking it? No. Not only does the universe continue to expand at a phenomenal rate, but it also, and more importantly for the purposes of today's lesson, is still accelerating. The longer it goes, the bigger it gets, and the faster it moves. Now, I don't care how you slice it, that kind of expansion on that scale with that kind of acceleration requires a great deal of energy. Well, where's that energy coming from? What's the source of that energy? Well, it appears to be coming from the differential between the whole universe and the visible universe. Now, if that's right, then, beloved, what that sounds like to me is a genuine, bona fide, certified, perpetual motion machine. Because the universe, as it is constructed, with light constantly racing at full speed to overtake the darkness, can not only work indefinitely, but profitably. Because it isn't just producing energy, it's producing more energy than it consumes. And that isn't natural. That's supernatural. After all, surely, if God knows what he's doing, if God is competent, then the energy that the cosmos is producing can be none other than glory. the glory of the Lord, the very energy that God designed it to produce. So the creation is doing what it was created to do. It was created for His glory, and it's fulfilling its reason for being. But that doesn't answer the question. We know why the cosmos exists. We know what it's doing and why it's doing it. What I want to know, however, is why does it have to exist? And why do we have to exist? If glory is something that the Lord requires, why doesn't He just make it for Himself? Why is there a midfix between Himself and the ultimate work of His hands? If glory is as fundamental to God, the Father's reason for being and self-existence as the Bible tells us that it is, why doesn't He just make it for Himself? Well, there are a couple of declarative statements in the Bible that may help to answer the question. In 1 Corinthians 6:12, Paul tells us that even where all things are lawful, not all things are expedient. So perhaps there's a principle at stake in this matter. Perhaps there's something in God's character that prevents Him from serving Himself directly in this way. But I think there's more to it than that. In John 8:54, the Lord says, "If I glorify myself, my glory is nothing." In Wycliffe, that statement reads, "If I glorify myself, my glory is naught." The NET reads, "If I glorify myself, my glory is worthless." And the word that's translated worthless there means naught, good for nothing, without, not at all, nothing, no matter, none whatever, absolutely nothing, of no account. Apparently, self-glorification isn't a viable option for God, because self-generated glory is vain. It's empty. It brings no net gain. According to Jesus, self-glorification is a dead end. But why is the cosmos the answer? What is it about the cosmos? What is it about this universe? What that makes this physical world productive in a way that heaven on its own isn't? Well, I think I know the answer. You know, this year, 2019, I have done more physical work than I have in over a decade. Those of you who know me know that some years ago I fell ill with anemia and Graves' disease and with a number of other physical problems that are too gross to go into, the cause of which were never diagnosed. Well, it took a year or two, but my doctors got my health stabilized and I felt better. But I never really got to feeling good till this year. And all of a sudden, at the beginning of this year, I felt better than I had in years. And consequently, I've had one of the most active years that I've had since 2006 or so. And this summer, in addition to doing Sing for Your Supper, I began working on the house and doing maintenance that has been needed for a long time. And that gave me a lot of time to think without study, just to think about things that I had already studied. The thing that I thought about more than anything else over the last 12 months is life and motion. Just the wonder of being alive and the fact that my body works at all. And the interaction of spirit and body and how it is that work gets done. How work gets done on earth and how work gets done in heaven. And I think I figured out the answer to this question. That's an arrogant way of saying that God showed me the answer to this question. You know, every time I sit down to write my book on grace, I get stymied as I try to work out the outline. because I want this book to come full circle. I want this book to be my Summa Theologica. I don't want it to end with a cliffhanger. I want the reader to be able to sit down and in a matter of a few weeks have a complete grasp on the grand schemata of redemptive history from age to age. But I can never complete my outline because there's always a piece missing. And this, I think, is the final missing piece. Presuming that God knows what He's doing and that everything He does is not just purposive but necessary, then why? Why the cosmos? Why this physical world? Why is the universe necessary? Well, because glory is work product. Glory is a work product. And what is work? Work is the transfer of energy by a force acting on an object as it is displaced. The work that a force does on an object is the product of the magnitude of the force times the magnitude of the displacement times the cosine of the angle between them. Now that may not sound very spiritual to you, but I assure you that it is. Remember, there is no intelligible way to talk about spiritual things apart from physical things. And that isn't a matter of accommodation. That's not a metaphor. That's not an analogy. That's not an allegory. C.S. Lewis was clever indeed to dream up Narnia as an allegorical way of teaching people about Christianity, but that is not what I'm doing this morning. The physicality of the spirit realm is not just analogous to the physicality of the universe. The two are correspondent. They're correlative. Indeed, as I will demonstrate to you in the year to come, they are interdependent. Because the cosmos is a tool created by God which He uses and upon which He depends to generate the work product that is dearest and most precious to Him. The work product of glory. God is spirit, and spirit is energy, and energy cannot produce work in a vacuum. I mean, think about it. Why is it, do you suppose, that airplanes don't have headlights? They have landing lights, but these are used only when landing. They're turned off in flight, even at night. Why is that? Well, because there's nothing to see. Light doesn't illuminate the sky, it illuminates objects in the sky. And there are no objects in the sky that could be illuminated with any utility by headlights on a plane, even if you had millions of candle power. If with your headlights you were to catch a glimpse of something ahead of the plane traveling at 500 miles an hour, that glimpse would give the pilot not even enough time to wet his pants, much less take evasive action. No, light cannot generate work product, which is visible information, unless and until it encounters objects, unless and until it meets resistance. Likewise, the wind. When the wind blows, the only reason we know it's blowing is because of relative motion. And the only reason it even matters that the wind is blowing is because of what happens when it meets resistance. If the surface of the earth were as smooth as glass, the wind couldn't do any work. It would just be moving air. But let it come in contact with a tree, and it'll produce work. Let it come in contact with the sail of a ship, and it'll generate work product. Let it come in contact with a windmill, and it'll accomplish something. Or try this. Try lifting a heavy object without holding your breath, or at least constraining your breath. It's one of the challenges faced by people who've had a tracheotomy. All of a sudden, They lose the natural ability to hold or to constrain or constrict their breath, and in this condition they find themselves unable to do work of any significance. Only by covering their tracheostomy with their hand or otherwise closing it can they do any lifting. Air has kinetic energy only when it is resisted, only when it comes in contact with an object that offers it resistance. And it's the same with the Spirit. God is Spirit, and the spirit world is not immaterial. The spirit realm has a physicality all its own, and there is matter, or something very much like matter, in the heavenly places. And when the energy of heaven comes in contact with the matter of heaven, work is done, and work product abounds. Indeed, without a physical body, the Godhead created this cosmos. But quite apparently, there is one work product, the generation of which is beyond the scope of the heavenly realm on its own. And that work product is glory. In John 8:54, Jesus tells us, "If I glorify myself, my glory has no substance." Beloved, the cosmos is. We are. I am by necessity. Without the cosmos, without the earth, without us, there is no harvest. Because without the cosmos, without the earth, without us, there is no work product called glory. No great harvest of glory. Now, I can prove that to you, and I will, starting next week. That's my lesson for today.